I'd like to call the meeting to order. Our first item is our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Vice Chair, could you read our mission statement?
Marshall Public Schools develops the potential of each learner for success in a changing world.
Thank you. Approval of the agenda. I'll make a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any additions? Hearing none, please vote.
I've stalled.
Okay, you speak.
No, I've just,
He's getting there,
I'm rebooting.
Reading the agenda before you approve it.
my computer wasn't unable to start.
Mine's, it's just a minute. I'll wait for it.
Vote early, vote early. It's getting there.
There we go.
There.
It is approved. Tiger Spotlight.
We have several people here today from the Marshall Middle School PBIS team, and I'll try to introduce them, and then I see we have some young men and young ladies, students, excuse me, sorry, that are here also, so we'll have them introduce themselves. But we'd like to recognize, as part of Tiger Spotlight, the PBIS team from the middle school, and I'll just read what's included in the agenda. Marshall Middle School was recognized by the Minnesota Department of Education as one of only 36 schools in Minnesota for their successful work using positive behavioral intervention and supports, a program that provides districts and schools throughout Minnesota with training and technical support to promote improvement in student behavior, especially for students with challenging social behaviors. The schools receiving recognition as sustaining exemplar schools are leaders in supportive, positive behavior, improving school climate, and increasing student achievement. Data in these schools shows clear evidence of the program's success, specifically in a reduced number of behavioral incidents, fewer suspensions, and increased levels of student engagement. To be identified as a sustaining exemplar school, staff need to submit an application that documented their work with PBIS, including professional outcomes, a plan for sustaining the program, and how they are giving back and sharing their practices with other schools throughout the state. Schools must also have been implementing PBIS for at least 3 years. This recognition placed the middle school in the top 2%, I believe it's actually 1.8, but top 2% of schools in Minnesota relative to their efforts with PBIS and the supports offered students. So on behalf of our school board and school district, we'd like to congratulate the Marshall Middle School PBIS team and their leadership. And here today representing the PBIS team are Steph Scarcett, Sandy Carpenter, Amanda Peterson, Dana Moore, and Principal, you look like Jeff Hansen for a second. That is better. Yeah, the shine's not quite so bad. And Mary Kay Thomas. And then I see you have three students, if someone would introduce those, we would appreciate it. Or if they want to introduce themselves, it's up to them.
My name's Carson. That's what I thought. Okay, my name's Carson, and I'm part of the Tiger Teens of Richmond.
My name is Bethany, and I'm part of the Tiger Teens in Richmond as well.
Don't go away, we're gonna get your picture, so.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thanks, guys.
Put your teachers behind you, right? Right over this way.
I don't think so.
Watch it.
Again, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Public forum, is anybody in the audience that'd like to approach the board? Kay, did you want to approach the board? Okay, thank you. Presentation, our first presentation, data,
First and
I'm sorry, did you say? We had some chatter on the other end there, Amanda, I'm sorry. Amanda, it's a pleasure to have you come and talk to us.
Thank you. Scott is actually going to join me tonight. Very excited about that. So I just wanted to start with the federal requirements for testing in Minnesota. And these have not changed. We had a lot of changes at the state level, but everything at the federal level has remained the same. So here is a list of the tests that we take at Marshall Public Schools, and nothing has changed. We have our math and reading in grades 3 through 8, and then once in high school, and our science once in elementary, middle, and high school. And then we have to also test our English learners, and they take the access test. And we test all students K through 12 every year with the access test. So just to summarize, our federal assessments have not changed. We use the MCAs and the access for our accountability purposes. And that's where our AYP, our MMR, and our AMAO results, that's where they get those results are from looking at these tests. And then everything is online this year. Last year, all of our MCA tests were online, and this year access is being added, so that'll also be online this year. So a lot of technology used during our testing. At the state level, as I mentioned, we do have some changes regarding testing. And one of the reasons I think you're going to keep hearing throughout this presentation about testing is there's a lot of reduction. There was some cuts in the funding for testing at the state level for MDE. So we've seen a lot of tests eliminated, and maybe the school having to start picking up some costs of those tests. So some of the things that were eliminated were the grade 8 Explore, the grade 10 Plan, and then the Compass test, and that was a high school test. We can still take these tests because they still have a lot of valid information that help us for our students when they are doing career and college planning. So at 8th grade, we are going to continue to take that test, but then that is a cost that we will now have to incur. That's $12.50 a student. At high school, we're still talking about whether we're going to do the plan or not. I think they're leaning towards it at this time, but I can't say 100% for sure. And that would also be $12.50 per student now to take that test. But again, the information that it gives our students and helping them plan for their courses that they're going to take and just helping them prepare for college and career, we do find these tests to be very useful and would hate to see them go. Then for the ACT, last year was the first year that all juniors were given the opportunity to take the test, and actually all students were required in their junior year to take the test. That has now changed again, and now they are just requiring that districts offer the administration during the school day for all juniors. So that's a change. So we went from all students needed to take it to those students should be offered the opportunity to take it during the day. This at first, when these changes were coming out, it was thought that the state had so much money and then schools who contacted the MDE first would kind of on a first come first serve basis get the funding for that until it ran out. But with some settlements through Pearson because of all the testing issues that they saw last year, Pearson will pay for all ACT tests for 15-16. That's a one-year shot. So that's where ACT stands right now. Another change this year is that districts are having to limit the amount of testing time our students are participating in. And you can see up there that it's 10 hours for grades 1 through 6, and it's 11 hours for grades 7 through 12. And these are just non-mandated testing. So you would include your MCAs, your MTAS, your Access, any SPED testing. Those are not included in those numbers. I'm currently working right now on putting together that information about how much time our students are spending on testing, so we can make some decisions administratively of where we need to go or if we need to cut back on some. Another change coming down the road is a new high school writing test, so they're bringing that back. That's really all the information that they have right now. As soon as there's more information, I'll be sharing that out with staff, but at this point, this is really all I know, is that there is one coming. Don't know what grade, don't know what it looks like. They're also eliminating the grad retest. Those were going to be going away. This was going to be the last year that those were going to be offered. But again, as a budget cut, they're taking them out right now. And I can tell you, though, that we did not test any students last year with the grad retest because with the changes in the assessments that they're allowing for graduation, we've been using other tests for those. So we did not have any kids take the grad retest, so I don't think that'll affect our students this year. And then the big one, though, is this is the last year of the OLPA test, and that's an optional local purpose assessment test. That is really a test preparing kids for the MCAs, and it's used similar to NWA fall and spring testing, where in the fall we can get an idea of where our kids are at, where can we focus our curriculum, where are they weak. So that is a real big disappointment, and a lot of our teachers are really disappointed to hear that that's going to go away. And again, that's if nothing changes. As things stand right now, the OLPA will be gone after this year. And then it just talks again about that ACT is no longer required for graduation. And that's with, this is starting with our juniors right now. We need to give them the opportunity to participate, but it is not going to be required to graduate. So kind of to sum that up, there is a decreased emphasis on assessments related to career and college readiness. And again, I don't know that that's really they don't want, it's not that they want to change the focus from that, but it's that the funding has been cut. So we're losing some of those tools that help us guide students in those areas. And then they are really wanting to limit the amount of tests administered at the district level. So we're not testing our kids as much, which I don't think is a bad thing. It's actually kind of interesting to kind of take a look and see where we are as a district. How many hours are our kids being tested? And we really haven't dug deep into that. So I'm really interested to see how this turns out. And then the no more OLPAs after this year. That's a big one. And then this is just a quick summary of what our testing schedule looks like for this year. Our testing window for MCA reading and math is March 7th through May 6th. Our science testing window is March 7th through May 13th. And then if we choose to do the optional local purpose assessment testing, it'll be October 19th through February 19th. And we will be using Pearson again, and I'm sure all of you guys heard of some of the issues that we had last year as a state. So we're really hoping that some of those things have been fixed and things go better. Todd's over there smiling. Yes, he helped us out greatly with that, and I'm sure he will be prepared when testing starts. And then our access testing window is February 1st through March 25th. And as I mentioned before, this is going to be a big change for us because it's all going to be online. So it's one more time when we are having to use either labs or devices, and just being online for that. It's a lot of students, about 327 to be exact, so it's a lot of testing.
So before we get into a lot of the specific information, we'll just talk, or I'll talk briefly about demographics. Obviously, all of our tests are broken down. We have all of our students that are lumped together, and then they break them down according to some of the subgroups. And I recognize and realize this is maybe old news for many of you, but it's always good just to maybe get us back into the flow of thinking subgroups. And you can see when you compare our district with the state, there are a lot of similarities in terms of what our student population looks like, consists of, is made up of, whatever you want to look at it, whatever perspective you want to look at it from. We're a little bit higher in free and reduced lunch, about the same in special ed, a little bit higher in EL or LEP, about the same in terms of ethnicity and white students as well. However, over the last 3 years, we've seen a growth in EL students. We've gained 70 students in 3 years. Free and reduced lunch, we've increased 122. Special education has gone up slightly. Our minority population has grown significantly. And the number of our white students, which you would classify as a white student when it comes to testing, has actually decreased a little bit. At the very bottom of this slide, Amanda and I talked about this, the total student population, I believe, has actually grown 240 students in the last 3 years compared to what we were funded for 3 years ago. We might have had more students at the end of the year, but than what that number is, but funded for it's in excess of, or right around 240 student growth. So obviously growing enrollment, our subgroups become more important, maybe larger, but yet we're really able to compare with the state because there's so many similarities, and that's one of the things that I think our conversations have really focused on lately when it comes to MCAs.
So here we go, we're just going to jump into the data. This is a graph of the last 5 years of our math scores district-wide. And here you can see is a statewide percent proficient, and here is Marshall percent proficient. So you can see we've kind of been pretty steady with the state. So here's just a summary after looking at each one of the grade levels. We did have three grade levels that were above the state average: grade 7, grade 8, and then grade 11. Disappointingly, though, we did see a decrease in our MPS scores by 4.5 points from last year.
Reading, similar type of perspective, last 5 years. This last year was the third year of the MCA 3s. Again, you can see that MPS, and can I have that? That's one of the things, one of the reasons we have to be careful to compare 75% proficiency back in 2012 with 60% the next year, because that was the year where they switched to a different version of the test. So consequently, what I look at more often is where are we at relative to the state average, because the third graders in the state take the same version of the test as third graders in Marshall do, so I think it's a more apples to apples comparison, if you will. But similar, I would say, to math. Third year, I already talked about that. New standards, how long have they been in place now? So 5 years with the standards that have been in place, the new Common Core ones, but it took a couple of years to get the MCA test up to speed to match those standards. 3 grades above the state average. However, when you combine 3rd through 8th grade and take all of our test scores in reading, we're a little bit below the state average.
So this is a chart that I've used before. You've probably seen every year since I've been in this position. Just another way to look at it, where it's breaking it down and by grade, and I've got math compared to the state, and then whether we are above or below the state. Reading, again, percent proficient for each grade level, the state, and then whether we're above or below the state. Sure.
Maybe you'll get to this, but what are the 8th grade math teachers doing that nobody else is?
Yeah, we do. Mary Kay, have you ever really gotten them to?
There's a variety of things, and that's probably one of the problems, is that there's so many things that they're doing that to try to credit one or two simple interventions isn't, would be futile to try to do. They really are doing so many things. One is the enrichments that they do. They very much categorize kids and make sure that any kids who are not meeting are put in enrichments, either one or two enrichments, which are interventions, math interventions. They're doing a tutor program, so the kids who are ready to move on go to 5th and 6th grade, and they help with 5th and 6th grade tutoring systems during their enrichment times. They, well, I mean, it kind of adds to, and it's not necessarily, those are things that are a little bit different from other grades, but the entire team is on board with each intervention that they do. So that
I kind of feel like it builds too, that 5th grade and 6th grade, 7th grade, and then 8th grade. I mean, it's just they continue. They're a really strong team.
yeah.
They really are, and they work very hard, and they work well together. And I think, 8th grade is reaping the benefits of all the work that's been done 5 through 8.
What happened in 4th grade? Why are we so low in 4th grade?
Well, that'll be something that we're definitely going to be looking at. We have building data meetings coming up starting next week. Middle school and West Side will be next week, and then high school will be.
So have they
after.
taken the test and found out what they're not learning? Has it been broken down to find out?
Yep,
what they're
and
not
that's what
learning?
we look at every year. And if Jeremy were here, I would think he would say that part of this was that they really focused on language arts and reading last year, and spent a lot of time on that. And this year, they will be spending a lot of time on math and doing the same things that we did in math. And they did see growth in their reading compared to their scores from 2014.
And just to segue off what you just asked about, Jeff, and I don't know this, I've looked at these numbers so many times. I should know it, but I don't. But you would look at that number for 4th grade math, and you would say, wow, that's not very good. And it's not. We're not willing to accept that, okay? But theoretically, not theoretically, we take, and Amanda and I talk frequently about this. If 2 years ago, that same group of kids was 21.9% behind the state or whatever, 2 years ago they wouldn't have tested, but a year ago, then we would say we've made progress. So we're trying to identify progress, but still, what are the things we need to get better at? And like I said, we wouldn't never accept that, but we're also trying to figure out things like, in what Matt brought up, what are the 8th grade teachers doing? Because that's something that happens year after year. We see that huge growth, if you will, or level above the state. And I think as we drill into this data even further, those are the types of things that, this is a snapshot. Amanda and I could sit here for 3 hours and go through this stuff if we wanted, but we're trying to give you the 30,000 foot view and afford an opportunity to ask questions like that. And then when we get to the building level meetings, we'll have those detailed discussions, and we'll say things like, as 3rd graders, they were 21.9% below the state average, so they grew 10%. Or vice versa. Maybe they were only 1.9% behind the state average, and they went down that much. Those are the types of things that we're looking for to build on and to improve and address. And I think you get that. Just some, and here's an example of what we look at, in 4th grade last year, so 5th grade this year, they were 5.5, that group of students was 5.5% below the state average in reading. So now they're 2.9% below, so that's an increase. Those are the types of things that we look at. We see almost a 3% increase, almost an 8% increase, an 11% increase,
and a 12% increase. So we're really drilling down, not just with MCAs, but also with NWPAs, which there's information coming up about, to try to figure out what does the data show us, and like you said, Jeff, what is it about that negative 11.9% below the state average in math? What is it that we're not doing as well as maybe the state or as we should be doing? We're looking at that.
Next, we've got science, and science we have some celebrations. Oh, I can't really see it from here, but we were at 48.8% last year, and at, would you say 50? So nice gains there as a district. And again, that's testing in 5, 8, and then after they take biology in high school, so usually 10th grade. And so here we have it broken down by grade, and it's the same method where I've got the grade level, percent proficient for Marshall, the state, and then whether we are above or below. And we made some great gains. Because last year we only had one grade level that was above the state average. Now we're going to take a look at our subgroup information. So our EL students, our free and reduced, our SPED, and we're going to start out with math. And some of our celebrations for math are that our white subgroup increased proficiency in math by 0.6 from 2014, and our SPED subgroup increased proficiency in math by 6.3 from 2014. And we reduced the achievement gap by 11.3. Opportunities for improvement. We had our EL subgroup decrease by 11.4, our Hispanic subgroup decreased by 6.2, our Asian subgroup decreased by 13.7, our Blacks subgroup decreased by 5.5, and our free and reduced decreased by 3.3.
Same thing in reading, and when we talk about subgroups, so if we have to have, I believe it's at least 20 students in a building or district-wide to have a formal subgroup. So if we only have 18 special education students, there wouldn't be a special ed subgroup. Although I think it's 40 actually for special ed. But, so our district is large enough where we pretty much have subgroups for every type of student, if you will. And one student, keep in mind, could count as a special education student, a free and reduced lunch student, maybe a Native American student, and in all students. So one of our kids could count in 4 different subgroups, if you will. So just depends on where you go. Same thing as reading, although a little bit different. A couple of celebrations with our white subgroup and our special education subgroup. Special ed, I think, ironically, was an area that we needed to improve in. And we saw some growth there from 2 years ago or a year ago, depending on how you look at it. But again, too many opportunities for improvement. It's not a bad thing to have opportunities to grow and get better, but we see way more opportunities for improvement in reading and in math than we do reasons to celebrate. And it's something that got to get turned around and figured out what's going on.
So just to summarize, in reading we did have some pockets of success. We had 3 of our 7 grade levels above the state average, but also pockets of concern. Exactly the same thing with our math. 3 out of our 7 grades were above the state average. Science, we have some areas to celebrate. We had 2 out of our 3 grade levels above the state average, and making big gains in our district-wide compared to the state. And then in general, our subgroups did not meet expectations. Our AYP results are in, and in just a refresher that those are based on participation, proficiency, and graduation or attendance rate, depending on the school. And we did not meet AYP in any of our individual buildings or as a district, and that's the first time I can remember that happening ever. But just a reminder that those AYP targets continue to get higher and higher, and that's one of the reasons why, as a state, we did the waiver to use MMR instead of AYP because of that issue. Again, targets just keep increasing and making it really hard for schools to meet those targets. MMR, our MMR results are also in, And this is the new accountability system in Minnesota. And this uses a 0 to 100% rating scale based on proficiency, growth, achievement gap reduction, and graduation. And each one of those domains is worth 25 points, and that's how you get your percent. And Westside is the only school that is eligible for an MMR designation because they're the only school that tests, and they're the only school that receives title dollars.
So NWEA is something that we've had in place for how many years have we been?
Since I've been here in 1999.
It's a long time. NWEA stands for Northwest Evaluation Association. It's an adaptive test that students take, and if they get a question, it's online, they get a question wrong, the difficulty level gets easier. If they get that right, the difficulty level gets harder until eventually they really zero in on a particular level of question that the student should be challenged by, but be able to get right the majority of the time. I think it's the adjustability piece is really nice, because if I'm I guess a real high flyer and I take a grade level test, chances are that test or that online assessment is going to be boring to me, and I may not take it real serious, or I might rush through it. If I'm a struggling learner, and again, it's at one particular grade level with no flexibility in the difficulty level of the test, I'm going to get frustrated really quickly. So that, I think that adaptability piece of the NWEA test, the immediacy of the results within 24 hours, a lot of the resources that we have available for our teachers, our administrators, and we need to get those out to our staff, admittedly. I don't know that we've done as much of that as we could have or should have. But there are a lot of reasons that I think we're going to want to continue to look at NWEA, especially because we no longer have the OPAs, which sort of was an NWEA to some extent.
Yep.
So on a positive note, and again, this isn't statewide, this isn't compared to statewide students, it's compared to literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students nationwide. But you can see positively in many of our grade levels in both math and reading last spring, our mean score, if you will, so using the example of kindergarten in math, their mean RIT was 158.6, whereas nationwide, the average or mean of kindergarten students at the end of their kindergarten year, 158.7, so you can see we're just slightly below that norm. So if you go down the difference columns, you'll see a lot of positive numbers. And that is something we need to build off of, in that last spring, many of our grades compared to their peers nationwide were above the norm in both reading and math. Now, the nation is not the state, and we know Minnesota has a very strong education system, so we need to make sure that we do things like that when it comes to MCAs as well. So, a challenge for us is that from the fall to the spring, we did not see the type of growth in several of our grade levels that nationwide the same group of or same age students typically grow. So that's something, again, that we need to emphasize a little bit more. We don't do winter testing in many of our grade levels. I think that's something we need to look at. We test in the fall and we test in the spring. Well, I would never say to Bill Mulso's son, you're going to shoot 100 free throws in the fall, and if you're going to make 50 of them, I'll check back with you again in the spring if I want him to make 70 of them. I would check frequently throughout the year. So I don't know that that's a best practice that we have going on right now. And that's something we need to talk about internally and figure out. It is more testing, but it also may yield a little bit of an impetus to, wow, our kids aren't getting where they need to be when they need to be there. So something we need to look at. But again, it's another perspective. It's not the same as MCAs, and it's not perfectly aligned with MCAs, but there is a lot of alignment between our state standards and NWEA's. I think I've already talked about those things.
So what is our response and direction after looking at all of our results from last spring? And Scott and I sat down and we kind of identified some things that we feel are really important, and one of those is best practices. We are doing a lot of things well, and we just need to continue to identify those and keep doing those things and sharing that information with other teachers and grade levels. So similar to what you guys were saying, what is that 8th grade team doing? What can we do to share that with other teachers? Curriculum, we need to make sure that our teachers are familiar with the state standards. That's what they're being tested on. So we have to keep giving them time to work on that and making sure that the material that we purchase for them to use lines up with our state standards and benchmarks. Data, we need to continue to evaluate our data and use that for decision making, and make sure that we provide professional development that ties in with what the data shows. Evaluations, we need to do a better job of evaluating our programs. We have a lot of things going on. What is working and what's not? And so I know there's a lot of administrators who have some goals, me included, that are specifically tied this year to evaluating certain programs that we're using.
Professional development, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit when I was talking about NWEA. We just need to make sure, I believe we have an incredibly hardworking staff who really care about kids district-wide. So how can we equip them with the skills, the knowledge, the resources, the tools, or whatever, to do an even better job with the amount of energy that they're expending, especially with the changing demographics that we're seeing in our student population. Our PLCs, our professional learning communities, and this might kind of tie back to that evaluation piece that Amanda just talked about. We think they're working well, but we need to ensure that they're working well, because that's a significant amount of the time that's invested on our families, so that our PLCs can be good quality time. Our administrators are going to get a little bit more involved this year and provide some feedback and coaching, not evaluation, but feedback and coaching. There's a distinct difference there, but hopefully we'll move that along and reiterate what we're really trying to do and make sure that it's effective. Standards-based learning, we've had that in place now for a number of years. I think we have a pretty good plan in terms of implement, sustain, pilot, research. That wasn't the order, but I think we have a pretty good plan in place for how we're transitioning into that. I know there's been a lot of work happening at the middle school and really getting down to making sure that kids master learning, even if it involves reteaching, and make sure that specific things are reported out to parents, not just a C+ in English language arts. What does that mean? What is the kid good at? What aren't they good at? Drilling down into the specific standards or I can statements or benchmarks or whatever, I think really is a good direction for us to be going. And then we just, I've probably said these many times, but we do need to work together and get ideas from staff and just collaborate on things. But I think the second bullet on this slide really kind of sums things up. We're trying to do some, I would say, more prioritizing and evaluating so that we can develop some next steps to improve what we're already doing. And to me, that is working smarter. Bless you. Do you have any questions? Anything? Like I said, 30,000 foot view. If you want to sit in on Amanda and I for a couple hours some afternoon with our data, she'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
That's okay.
I think this was brought up in a previous meeting, talking about trying to break it down. And I think some of the counselors had talked about, or we had talked about trying to actually look at individuals, not just groups. That's something that you're looking into further?
Yeah, teachers have access to that through ADG at any time, although our ADG is down right now, but we do have, it's a data warehouse, and that's where all their student test scores are kept. Campus is also another way they can look at it, but ADG allows them to print reports for their classes. So they, whenever the class that they have right now, they'll get all their scores or have access to all their scores for as long as they've been taking MCAs or NWEAs and access tests. So they do have that ability.
And is that something that the next year's teacher maybe has a heads up on a student, so it's not the same, you know, each year, that maybe that student can get some extra help if,
Yes, they have access to that, yes. And it'll be one of the things that we're looking at this year too in our data meetings. We're going to be pulling all the students who tested last year, and I'm gonna have them do some of the work instead of me handing it to them, identifying the kids who were at the does not meet, the kids who were at partially, the kids who were at meets, the ones who were at exceeds. So they have an idea of who those kids are, and it'll all be right in front of them, and they'll be the ones working that through, so.
They
That'll-
should already know who's behind and not behind. though.
They should, yep, absolutely. But they have a lot of ways of looking at it. They have the ADG, they have campus, they have any test scores that we do this fall. They get all that information back immediately. They can go into the NWA site at any time also and print reports of how students are doing, how their kids are doing. They can do individual student reports. They have access to a lot of data.
And I think we do some of that already, Deanna. In fact, I know we do whenever we are trying to figure out which students need extra or supplemental support. We have to go down and we need to continue to go down to the individual student level to look and try to identify those things for things like reading core, Title I, EL services, different things like that.
So we have enough services offered for the ones that are behind to get them caught back up?
There are never enough services.
And I'm saying if you have 4 students that are testing low in math all the time, do we have a program set up for them in 4th grade to raise them up? Or are they just going to be behind when they get to 5th grade? Understand my question?
Yeah, math is going to be more limited than reading probably in our case, which is typical in many districts. We all tend to focus on reading. And I wasn't being sarcastic when I said we never have enough resources to help students, because literally some students would benefit greatly from one-on-one help, and maybe we don't have the resources to, maybe our resources only allow us to help them in groups of 2 or 3 or something like that. So I feel like, and maybe Amanda disagrees, and maybe our principals do, that we could always use more resources. But going back to one of the slides on there said evaluation is something we need to do more of. You know, Amanda and I have said, you know, how do, and Jeremy is a good example, how do we know our title services are effective? Well, we think they are, but do we know that? We need to evaluate things like our title services, Title I, to see if those students are growing and hopefully outpacing the peers that aren't getting Title I services. And if they're not, then why are we doing what we're doing? Or what could we be doing differently? And those are conversations that we're having more of now.
Yes, we're having lots of conversations. Spend a lot of time with Scott. It's lovely.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Board forum, does anybody in the board have anything they'd like to highlight?
I got a couple things, if that's okay, Joe.
Sure.
Can we go on to
Sure.
8.2? The Facilities Study Committee last met on, I believe it was August 31st. And at that time, the committee reviewed the 3 draft ideas or proposals that continue to move forward for consideration, and really took a look at the pros and cons of each relative to the priorities that were identified through our priority survey. And those priorities are building security, class sizes, student enrollment by site or building, financial impact and transparency, future learning, early childhood programming, accommodation and/or expansion, setting things up for hands-on learning, repurposing the pool at West Side here, and some grade configuration things that were desired. In addition, the committee also looked at the costs and tax impact of each idea or proposal. I believe that they ranged anywhere from maybe 30, might have to help me out a little bit, Bruce, $38 million to 42, if I'm not mistaken. So there was a lot of discussion about that. The average household in Marshall would have seen on a $40 million bond, would have seen, I believe, $156 annual tax increase. So we're just trying to frame that out and figure out where to go from here. The committee will meet again on the 14th, which is a week from last night, at 6:00 p.m. And I'm not sure if it will take one or two more meetings, but the goal is really to have a recommendation or perhaps two recommendations for the board as early as the October school board meeting. Committee members, is there anything that we should talk about or share that I missed or left out inadvertently?
Any questions on our second reading of policies? Move on to our discussion of our enrollment updates.
Tricia, if you could open that document up. You know, at the start of every school year, it's always interesting to see where your enrollment numbers are at, and these numbers are as of last week, I believe last Friday. I went ahead and updated the 2014-2015 enrollment numbers based on what we were funded for. So in 2014-15, we were funded for, not including early childhood, 2,308 students. And that doesn't mean that we had 2,308 students enrolled on any one particular day of the school year. There could have been more, there could have been less, but that's what we were funded for. Right now, or last week, we had 2,448 students for a 140 student increase. 31 more students at Parkside than last year, than funded for last year. 8 more students at Westside than funded for, 27 more at the middle school, 67 more at the high school, and 7 more than at Maytech. So that's a total of 140 students. Just gives you a little bit of a historical perspective in terms of our enrollment and where we've come over the past really 5 or 6 years relative to student enrollment growth, which was not, I should make that a positive statement, which was anticipated growth and projected growth, and we feel like it's going to continue. So you can try to answer questions if you have any.
I just want to, for the first and second grade, because they're over the max target, what kind of, I mean, I'm sure you looked into it. What are your plans? How long do you wait to see if that number stays there?
Well, we think, we feel like the numbers have stayed relatively stable. Bruce and Darcy and I have developed a list of possibilities. I would say there are 4 or 5 of them. We have a facilities committee meeting after the school board meeting today, and that'll be something that we discuss relative to direction, but we need to do something soon, Deanne. We recognize that. And options can include everything from not doing anything to trying to lease space somewhere to create new sections in both first and second grade. We can displace several people and programs at Parkside, perhaps, and try to do some makeshift classrooms. We could bring in portable classrooms. Each of those have pros and cons to them. So that's something that we'll look to the facilities committee after this meeting for a little bit clearer direction on. And Bruce, certainly if you want to add anything, feel free to do so.
I studied this chart for at least 30 minutes before I could figure it out. Figured it out yesterday, so. Yes. Thanks.
Have you heard today what enrollment did? I heard over the weekend, one teacher commented that they do have 5 new students starting today in one building. Have you heard anything?
I don't think so. It was the west side, yeah. We hear that stuff all the time, and so we believe that, assuming what we thought was going to happen did happen, that there would be 5 more students in the west side who started school today. And it's not uncommon to see, I would say, sometimes double-figure changes district-wide in terms of 3 kids coming into first grade. I'm just making this up, but 2 kids leaving second grade, 1 coming into third grade, 4 coming into fourth grade, 5 leaving. I mean, it's not uncommon to see double-digit changes in a day. A lot of mobility right now. I think by October 1st, we'll have a better idea of what the numbers will look like for the rest of the year, but I can't necessarily speak to that in Marshall yet because I only have 1 year here, but I know in a lot of districts that mobility will continue to happen throughout the school year.
Yeah, and
I
that's
think-
pretty standard, I think, for Marshall too. There's changes happening really on a daily basis. And then because we're on the fly and the rest of the state of Minnesota, except for this year, is the after Labor Day start, we do, to Bill's point, typically see some changes, usually additions, on the day after Labor Day, because some people just go by that calendar and don't realize that we're on the flexible learning year. So it'll be interesting to see how many changes we do have today as compared to what we had on Friday.
Okay, moving on to our policy timeline and review.
One of the things we just wanted to do briefly to update you on and is to let you know that Tricia does a great job with this, but we do have a policy review plan in place that will allow us to review every policy at least one time every 3 years. She just updated it, I believe, last week. We don't need to spend time on it. You don't need to look at it, but just to reassure you that, one of your primary responsibilities as a school board is policy review and approval, and we do have a plan in place to continue to review those so that we're not as far behind as what we maybe could fall.
Moving on to our action items, we have approval of the 2015-16 superintendent goals. I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
For discussion. Scott and I worked hard on this to see if we could also make sure we could measure it. If there's no questions, we'll call a vote. It is approved. Anything else, board members? Meeting's adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you guys have anything you'd like to bring up or highlight, or?
Monica and I are talking about the backpack situation at the high school, and we'd like to bring it up to the next meeting.
I was going to bring it up to the
Yeah.
superintendent because I had a couple phone calls.
Yeah,
already
got a
on
lot
that,
of
so-
with pros and cons next meeting. So what should we tell students, like why we don't have backpacks? That's our question.
Well, it was explained to me, the parent told me that was because of a safety issue.
Mm-hmm.
That- Are you familiar with what's going on?
I'm a little bit, but probably not,
Yes,
obviously not as much
I
as you
guess,
two.
and you correct me if I'm wrong, I had a couple parents call me about that they're not allowed to take their backpacks to class
Yeah,
because they're worried about somebody tripping over the hoops on the backpack.
yeah,
And then, so if they had to leave them in the locker, these parents said their children did not have time to go from the classroom to the locker to get their next book or whatever out back on time,
right.
is what their concern was. They want to know why we had a policy for that.
And the laptops, they're like heavy and it's useful. The backpacks are very useful with the laptops.
That's kind of what, I was going to bring that up to you later.
Have you two talked to Mr. Jones and Mr. Frazee yet? Just to, I would encourage you to start that way. Just
Okay.
things can always progress to the school board level, but I think a lot of times we can learn more about a situation and maybe even resolve it by starting with the people who are primarily responsible for it. So I'd encourage you to do that, and then if you want to contact Tricia to set something up to visit with me, let's do that.
All right, sounds
Okay?
good.
All right.
Anything else? Still going good?
Yep.
Okay, we need adjourned. Thank you.